The week of February 9th, the geotechnical crew begins boring at the pier locations for the new bridge, starting in water on the Oregon side. These borings will drill 2-inch diameter holes to take core samples deep into the soil to confirm that the bridge piers will be footed into bedrock. That's critical to building a seismically sound bridge. The current bridge footings aren't in bedrock. The challenge, again, is access on the Washington side. The Washington side has one on-land pier, and that's located in an area with an easement held by the Army Corps of Engineers, where it'll take 6 months to get a permit to go in there and drill. But the team has a plan to move 15 feet away, and they believe that will give them a workable solution. Let's hear how that will happen.
In-water borings also are going to be starting here on still February 9th. So they'll start on the Oregon side. Hopefully by the time they get done with the Oregon borings, we will have the permits for them to move straight into the Washington side. We're also looking at access for the Washington on-land borings in between the railroad and the water. There's 2 borings there. We're making sure we're staying outside of a Army Corps easement. If we have to do it in that easement, it's about a 6-month third permitting process to get access.
So on the borings, I thought that the U.S. Coast Guard was the permitting authority.
Oregon has its own permitting, and then Washington has its own permitting processes, and some of those require different levels of reviews.
And because of this access issue, you're thinking about moving those core samples just outside of that envelope, which would be roughly 15 feet away.
Yes.
Are you guys, when you do the surveys, are you going to show where you want to do it legally?
Yeah.
And are you also going to show the center of the other ones and how far away they truly are?
We can shoot those in if we
I would urge you to shoot them in.
What are you worried about?
I want to just make sure that from what we can see, the contour of the land, if it's off the cliff, that's one thing. If it's similar ground, at least from the surface, it gives you a little bit more warm fuzzy that you're in the ballpark. You got to remember.
Let's step back and learn a little bit more about these steel shafts sampling and what the team is trying to accomplish and why the positions matter so much.
This is an example of the pile or the drilled shafts that will go into the water. These shafts in this picture are about 8 foot in diameter. Currently ours for the Hood River-White Salmon Bridge are going to be over 9 foot in diameter.
It's a 9-foot shaft, a 2-inch core sample in a 9-foot circle. The odds of you being homogeneous all the way across that 9 foot is probably.
Yeah, it's as with anything, when you take the boring, the farther away you are from that hole, the more risk there is.
Potential variability
in the distance you are away, right? So if we have to take it at 15 or 20 or 30, the farther you get away, the more risk there is. And that affects pricing and risk assumptions and risk allocation of, what the contractors.
The big thing is the rock elevation, wherever you hit good, competent rock, because we have to drill between like 2.5 diameters, 9 foot times 2.5 into the rock. And then you have a rebar cage that's a fixed length. So you go build those rebar cages. They take a week to build each rebar cage or more. And then if you hit rock at a different place, you need a different length of rebar cage. You got to go rebuild the rebar cage and things like that. It might affect your design. So there's a level of risk.
But the real issue we're trading is we're moving over 15 feet, so we don't have to lose 6 months.
Commissioner Ben Berger asked some questions about the risks associated of having only a few borings for each of these 9-foot shafts and what the effect on future change orders and costs could be. And the commission then spent some time talking about that.
Change orders with rock, and borings and things like that. And one of them you hit on is, if the borings show that it's sand and then in fact it's actually rock. That's a big thing, that the elevation at which you hit the rock is then a function of how deep you have to drill, and then it's also a function of the design. So if those are in different places, then that constitutes usually a change. Those are some of the big things, but definitely some of the most risky work that is on, from a design point of view and a constructability point of view on a bridge like this is the foundations. And there's just so many different things and so many complications that could go wrong in them.
The other one that I see, when you take a look at the type of rock that we've got in the general area, it's a lot of this fragmented volcanic columns. And when you just look at the cliffs, you can see those columns coming up. And if you happen to hit a column that's halfway demolished anyway or fractured, that has a big impact on your design of your foundation to be able to consider that. And some of it you'll find in the core sample. But remember, 2 inches out of 9 foot diameter, the odds are it's not going to be homogeneous all the way across. We're going to have to deal with it anyway. It just gives you an indication of kind of what kind of formation you've got and kind of where you're going to hit rock depth. But much below that, 2 inches out of 9 feet, you're still going to be guessing.
If you think back to when we did the first core samples a while back, we discovered that the bottom was someplace entirely different than we thought, which made major changes in the nature of those pilings and piers. What we're talking about now is questions of relatively small variations. We're not going to discover that it's 100 feet deeper.
The big difference here now is that when we took the sampling a couple of years ago, we did the best we could as far as where to take them. We've got actual physical locations now for the piers, and we're going to those exact positions to see locally.
That's my point. But once we know what the depth is on each of them, we then, when we know what the sample says, we're not going to then find that when we go with the 9 foot boring and go down and have this 9.5 foot wide hole, we're not going to discover, oh my God, there's another 100 feet there. We may discover some small differences.
It's not to say that we're not going to have something similar, even with a 9 foot diameter, that you could be on an edge of one of those drop offs into a pool. You won't know it until you start drilling.
But we've done a number of things to mitigate that. We've vetted the holes where the pier sizes. We've come through and we've targeted our drill holes for those. If we see something weird when we start pulling them up, we have a contingency already allocated so that we can go back and drill some additional holes to see if we can get enough information to verify it ourselves. So, I mean, out of how many piers, I can't remember how many we're doing now, 20, 40 some odd. And we've got one that we're going to make a deviation on to save 6 months. I think that's
we're actually not moving the piers. We're just moving where the sample is going to be taken.
Right.
We may, if we find out something there that's unique, we may go back and do an additional hole closer to the pier, or we may move the pier to where the boring is so that we know better. And we'll make those decisions when we gain more information.
Where the information may be consistent among the last 15 borings that we do, and we feel pretty good about it.
Out of a 9 foot diameter shaft, we're doing 2 inches per each boring. Doing 4 inches per boring is about equal to doing a 2 inch boring. When you look at the overall area, I think one is probably appropriate unless that one hits one of the cliffs that could be there. I think this is going to be a risk that we're just going to have to assume until we really start drilling the shaft out there. It's going to be a risk until you really, really see over that 9 foot section what's really going to happen. I think one per shaft is probably good enough, but there's still a risk there.
That's all I've got from last week's meeting. But for those of you who didn't hear the question and answers from the bridge group last fall, here's a little sampling that gives you information about the different parts of the bridge and its various components. That helps as you listen to regular meetings when they talk about girders, piers, shafts, piles, and all sorts of other terms that many of us aren't that familiar with.
In the water, below the water line are piles or shafts. We're going to have 4 to 6 pile per footing, and then on top of the pile there's a pile cap. So that's a big concrete block that ties all those pile together and helps them act as one unit. From there, there's going to be columns, concrete columns going up, and then on top of the columns is a pier cap. So similar to a pier cap that connect the tops of those two columns together and gives it, some rigidity there. And then on top of that is where we place the steel girders and then the bridge deck that will be the driving and walking surface. So in order to get all that going, you have to go out and build some temporary access to get access into the water. So one of the first things you'll see us doing is we'll start driving pile and building like a temporary trestle that will go out into the water. That temporary trestle allows us to bring, the heavy machinery, the cranes and the equipment and the material that we need to be able to build the bridge. This is an example here of this is what's called like the main line of the trestle, and then on the red arrows there are fingers. And so the main line of the trestle allows us to move material and equipment, back and forth from different pier location to different pier location. And then one of the things that we'll most likely have at the end of our trestle is we'll have a ramp of sorts to where we can bring a barge in, and then we can lower the ramp down onto the barge and drive concrete trucks and put material onto the barge and then take it out to the bridge. So once we have all the temporary access all in place, then we can start, really building permanent structure. This is an example of the pile or the drilled shafts that will go into the water. These shafts in this picture are about 8 foot in diameter. Currently, ours for the Hood River-White Salmon Bridge are going to be over 9 foot in diameter. And you can see here in this picture, we've got the shafts installed at a couple different pier locations. And while those have been installed, we're continuing to work in other locations.
We should be seeing some of that sampling work going on beginning the week of February 9th, also on the North Shore of Washington. And at the next Bridge Authority meeting, we should get an update.